2 million feral hogs roam the vast landscapes of Texas, a staggering number that places the state at the epicenter of a massive biological crisis. Why do these creatures represent such a catastrophic threat to the region? One can notice how a single sounder of hogs can systematically demolish a year of agricultural labor in a single night, leaving nothing but overturned soil and ruined harvests in their wake. This destruction translates into a financial drain of $119 million annually from the Texas agricultural sector alone. The process of managing this crisis is only gaining momentum. While observers from other states often view the situation with detachment or skepticism, the local reality remains one of constant economic erosion. Communities eventually transition to a new level of strategic defense by abandoning isolated individual efforts. It seems simple at first glance to set a trap on a single farm, but in reality, this only pushes the animals onto neighboring land without reducing the overall population. To solve this, residents began to synchronize hunting, surveillance, and trapping into a unified technical network. Instead of chasing the sounders across property lines, the equipment gradually allowed for the simultaneous boxing in of entire groups across multiple counties. The camera glides along the perimeter of these coordinated zones where motion sensors and cellular traps operate in unison. It is visible how the systematic removal of entire sounders prevents the rapid repopulation that previously sabotaged smaller efforts. Results began to manifest across entire districts within just a few weeks of implementing the synchronized system. This organized approach transformed a chaotic agricultural nightmare into a calculated and technologically driven campaign of suppression. The transition from reactive hunting to a coordinated data-backed offensive marked a definitive shift in how the state protects its resources. Thus, the transformation of the landscape moves into a more controlled phase of environmental management. Zero feral hogs existed on the North American continent several hundred years ago. It is a biological reality that these massive wild populations, which currently number in the millions, are not indigenous to the land. Why did a species that never existed here naturally become such a dominant force across the landscape? Humans initiated this shift when European explorers and subsequent early settlers introduced pigs to the New World. These animals served as a form of mobile food storage, released intentionally into the wilderness to provide a self-sustaining meat source for long, grueling journeys across unmapped territories. The transition from domestic livestock to a wild threat began gradually. One can notice how some animals simply wandered away from settlements while others were abandoned during failed colonial efforts. Everything only gets more complicated further on. During the 19th and 20th centuries, European wild boars were imported specifically for sport hunting, eventually escaping or being released into the same regions. It only looks obvious that they would remain separate, but in reality, these two distinct groups began to interbreed. The resulting hybrid combined the massive size and aggression of the wild boar with the high reproductive capacity of domestic swine. This biological intersection created a creature that is exceptionally intelligent, highly adaptable to various terrains, and capable of multiplying at extreme rates that defy standard ecological controls. The southern United States provided the perfect theater for this rapid expansion. A combination of a consistently warm climate, abundant water sources, and vast stretches of open land offered the ideal environment for the hybrids to thrive. The process is only gaining momentum as the animals push further into the interior. Texas has paid a heavier price than any other region for this unintended biological experiment. One can notice how the feral hogs now behave like an organized army without uniforms or borders, constantly maneuvering into new territories. They occupy the land with a relentless persistence, expanding their range into agricultural and suburban zones. This concludes the historical context of their arrival, marking the transition into a state of permanent environmental conflict. 100 feral hogs moved across the field in Fannin County as Jay Norman turned his tractor at the edge of a planting row in 2004. Why would such a massive group of animals target a single cornfield with such surgical precision? It would seem that the hogs were looking for random forage or fallen grain from the previous season. But in reality, they were tracking the exact path of the planter to consume the seeds that had touched the soil only minutes earlier. The seeds were gone before the dust from the tractor had even settled. One can notice how the animals moved in an organized line, following the furrows with systematic efficiency to unearth the fresh corn. Norman stood frozen in the cabin of his machinery while watching hours of labor and significant financial investment disappear into the earth. Hours of work were wiped out in a matter of moments as the hogs tore through each furrow one by one. The process is only gaining momentum. This was not a random incident or a singular occurrence of bad luck. It only looks obvious that a farm would be protected by its distance from the woods, but this event marked a fundamental shift in the local ecosystem. 2004 was the specific year the problem of feral hogs arrived on Norman's land for the first time. 20 years prior, he had observed similar destruction on distant properties and categorized those events as rare exceptions. But now the destruction was occurring on his own property, with a frequency that suggested a permanent change. The animals showed no signs of retreating or stopping their advance across the agricultural landscape. It is visible how the organized nature of the sounder allowed them to maximize the damage in a short window of time. This marked the beginning of a period where Texas would face an entirely new scale of agricultural challenge. Everything only gets more complicated as the population density of the hogs continues to rise across the county. The transition to a state of constant monitoring became a necessity for the survival of the crop. Thus, the peaceful routine of the planting season ended, replaced by a technical struggle against an invasive force. $119 million is the annual financial toll recorded by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, according to 2019 statistics. Why do agricultural losses reach such staggering proportions every year? At first glance, it seems like a random occurrence of nature, but the reality involves a high level of animal adaptation. Feral hogs have developed the ability to recognize specific corn planting equipment by its shape and sound. They do not attack the fields at random. Instead, they observe the planting patterns with calculated patience. One can notice how the animals wait for the tractor to reach a safe distance before they move into the fresh furrows to systematically extract the seeds. The process of destruction is gaining momentum across the state. Norman was forced to replant multiple acres every year as a direct consequence of this behavior. Resources including seeds, fuel, labor, and hundreds of hours of time were poured back into the soil repeatedly. It is visible how the hogs follow the precise lines of the planter, undoing days of mechanical labor in a single night. This is not the result of unpredictable weather or crop disease, but a focused exploitation of the agricultural cycle. But this is just the beginning of the crisis. By 2025, when property damage and total crop destruction are factored in, the financial burden in Texas has surged to nearly $500 million. Entire fields are wiped out in the span of a few hours, leaving only overturned soil and ruined irrigation lines. The scale of this mechanical destruction goes far beyond broken fences or simple trampled gardens. Farmers are frequently forced to start their entire production cycle from scratch after a single nocturnal raid. The problem does not end at this stage. Feral hogs have successfully migrated into urban centers, such as the city of Irving. One can notice the damage to manicured lawns, public parks, and even the grounds of local schools as the animals expand their territory. Within the agricultural sector, corn remains the primary target for these sounders. They also systematically damage crops of soybeans and wheat, though corn consistently sustains the most severe and frequent losses. To survive these conditions, many producers have made the difficult technical transition to planting milo or cotton. Changing the type of crop does not solve the underlying issue. It only shifts the target for a population that possesses an extraordinary ability to adapt to new environments. The equipment continues to move across the fields, but the hogs remain a constant shadow in the tree lines. The material reality of farming in this region has been permanently altered by their presence. Everything only gets more complicated as the populations grow and move further into developed areas. This transformation of the landscape represents a fundamental shift in the regional ecosystem that shows no signs of slowing down. 100% of the traditional methods deployed by Norman proved to be insufficient against the rising population of feral hogs. He utilized every familiar technique available, from setting intricate mechanical traps and laying specialized bait to employing trained dogs to drive the invasive animals away from his property. But the final result was always the same, regardless of the effort exerted. At best, the impact on the land remained purely temporary. Why do these standard defensive measures fail to solve the crisis permanently? One might assume that physical removal would decrease the population over time, but in reality, the hogs were never eliminated from the ecosystem. They were simply pushed across the boundary lines into neighboring fields, only to return to their original territory as soon as the immediate pressure from hunters or dogs eased. This cycle did not constitute a solution. One can notice how it merely functioned as a method for passing a regional problem onto another landowner. Trapping sounds highly effective when discussed in theory, but the equipment gradually reveals its limitations in the field. The entire process becomes an endless loop of labor and minimal reward. It is a known fact among agricultural experts that no farmers manage to trap 200 to 300 hogs in a single year. Yet even those high numbers would barely make a dent in the local population density. With their explosive reproduction rate, surrounding groups can replace those specific losses within a window of just a few months. It gets more complex further on. The mathematical reality is that land managers are trying to fight exponential biological growth with isolated linear efforts. Everything only gets more complicated because feral hogs are not unintelligent creatures. The animals learn with surprising speed to avoid the mechanical triggers of traps, and one can notice how they change their feeding times to avoid human interaction. They intentionally steer clear of specific areas that have been heavily hunted or where they have previously encountered danger. Traditional methods simply cannot keep up with the adaptability of the species anymore. This is not the limit of their survival capabilities. Because of this constant adaptation, the situation superficially looks like a permanent stalemate for the agricultural sector. Why are people suddenly saying the feral hog problem might finally be coming to an end? It seems like a simple question, but the answer lies in a shift toward technological intervention. The process is only gaining momentum as new strategies are introduced to the field. The struggle for control over the land transitions to a more technical and calculated phase of operations. 1,600 acres of corn can be decimated in a single night by a large sounder of feral hogs. This constant threat has forced the state of Texas to abandon the search for a single secret weapon in favor of a layered control system where each technical component reinforces the next. Why is such a complex technological network necessary to combat an animal? Traditional methods fail because they rely on chance, but this new infrastructure integrates smart traps equipped with high-resolution cameras and constant mobile connectivity to eliminate the element of luck. The process is only gaining momentum. Farmers and wildlife technicians deploy massive corral traps baited with corn throughout the landscape. Cameras mounted on the frame stream live infrared or high-definition footage directly to mobile devices across the state. It is visible how the feral hogs move in to feed on the bait, completely unaware that every step they take inside the perimeter is being monitored through a digital uplink. Once the sensors and visual feed confirm that the entire sounder has crossed the threshold, the gate is triggered to close with a single tap on a screen from any remote location. Texas Wildlife Services implemented this exact protocol in Irving after hogs flooded residential areas and parks near Champions Park. Local residents had previously attempted to repel the animals with electric fencing, but the real breakthrough came from precise real-time control. One can notice the efficiency of this method as it removes the need for waiting or guessing. Action is taken only when the physical sensors confirm the moment is right. The difference is scale. It seems like a simple process of catching animals, but in reality, standard traps often trigger too early or catch only one or two individuals. Smart traps allow human operators to observe the scene until the entire population enters the enclosure, ensuring the removal of the whole group in a single move rather than picking them off one by one. But this is just the beginning of the logistical challenge. Initial setup costs for these systems are significant, often running into the thousands of dollars. Beyond the hardware, farmers must account for ongoing mobile data fees and the labor of regular maintenance. However, when compared to the cost of replanting 160 acres of corn at roughly $400 per acre for seed and labor, many realize a smart trap can pay for itself after preventing just one disaster. Consequently, neighbors frequently choose to split the total cost, sharing mobile systems to monitor multiple properties across several miles. It only looks obvious to drop the gate immediately, but these traps require a period of extreme patience. Hogs must be conditioned over a period of 10 days to 2 weeks through a process of gradual desensitization. Operators at first keep the gates raised high, to allow free feeding, then lower them by small increments over several nights. By the time the hydraulic or mechanical trap is fully operational, the animals are comfortable enough to drop their guard. Still, the state of Texas understands that even these advanced smart traps are not enough on their own. In fast-spreading hot zones where the population density is critical, they needed something more aggressive. The process requires a tool that gives the feral hogs no time to adapt to their environment. Thus, the strategy shifts toward more mobile and rapid methods to maintain the pressure. $4,000 per person is the starting price for a specialized aerial operation designed to protect Texas agriculture. At dawn, clients board helicopters worth several $1,000,000 to begin a high-stakes mission against invasive species. The aircraft fly at low altitudes over expansive farmland, equipped with heavy weaponry for the sole purpose of tracking and eliminating feral hogs. These animals cause massive destruction to crops, necessitating a level of mobility that traditional methods cannot provide. Why do these creatures become such a vulnerable target from the air? While species like deer remain within strictly limited home ranges, feral hogs move constantly across the landscape. This relentless mobility, which usually ensures their survival, becomes a fatal weakness when faced with an aerial vantage point. Ground hunters, regardless of their experience level, are restricted by the terrain and can typically cover only a few hundred acres during a full night of tracking. In contrast, a helicopter team sweeps across thousands of acres in a matter of hours. It is visible how the aircraft maneuvers over cooperative regions that span up to 400,000 acres of continuous territory. From this height, the geography of the infestation becomes transparent to the operators. Pilots identify daytime bedding areas that remain hidden deep within thick, impenetrable brush from any other angle. The equipment gradually reveals movement corridors between various feeding zones. One can notice how the team tracks hogs crossing creeks and navigating terrain that is completely inaccessible to any ground-based vehicles. This aerial intelligence provides farmers with a comprehensive map of animal movement that years of ground observation could never fully assemble. The process is only gaining momentum as the sun rises. Hunts generally last for a duration of 2 hours and commence exactly at sunrise to coincide with peak feeding and breeding activity. Texas law facilitates these operations by not requiring a hunting license, provided the activity occurs on private land with the explicit permission of the landowner. At first glance, the sheer power of the helicopter seems like a total solution, but in reality, its effectiveness has specific boundaries. Those directly involved in the industry acknowledge that aerial hunting cannot stand as an isolated strategy. It functions most efficiently as a single high-impact strike within a much larger integrated system. The strategy requires that pressure be applied to the invasive population continuously, transitioning from the ground to the sky to maintain control. The aircraft eventually returns to the landing pad as the morning heat increases, concluding this specific phase of the containment effort. Texas approved the implementation of war-grade poisons engineered specifically for the eradication of feral hog populations. Why is such a high level of chemical toxicity permitted for use in the open environment? One might assume this leads to indiscriminate poisoning of the ecosystem, but in reality, the application remains a form of strictly regulated and conditional chemical warfare. Every individual authorized to deploy these substances must first complete specialized training and obtain official certification. Bait sites must be enclosed by physical fencing to ensure the exclusion of livestock and other non-target species from the immediate area. The bait stations are themselves designed as mechanical barriers that prevent accidental access. One can notice the use of heavy guillotine-style doors or sophisticated magnetic mechanisms that require a specific, significant force to engage. Small mammals like raccoons, as well as deer and birds, lack the physical strength or morphology to operate these triggers. Only the powerful snout of a feral hog can lift the barrier, but this is just the beginning. The success of the operation depends entirely on the method of deployment rather than the toxicity of the chemical itself. It only looks obvious to place the poison immediately, but landowners must first establish a pattern of trust within the sounder. Landowners begin by providing standard corn, then gradually transition the animals to a non-toxic placebo bait over a period of several days. Only after the hogs have mastered the mechanics of the feeder and become accustomed to eating at the site is the active chemical agent introduced. the process is only gaining momentum. This entire conditioning phase typically spans a duration of 10 days to 2 weeks. The heavy feeder doors are lowered in increments step by step, which forces the hogs to apply increasing physical strength during each feeding session. There is no possibility of rushing or skipping these mandatory intervals. Patience is rewarded with results. Entire sounders, which generally consist of 20 to 30 individual hogs, are eliminated in single coordinated strikes that leave no survivors to reproduce. At the same time, researchers ceaselessly test alternative chemical formulations. This is done to prevent the hogs from developing any avoidance behaviors or resistance to a single type of bait. It gets more complex further on. Debate regarding environmental impact and animal welfare remains a constant factor in the regulatory process. However, the recorded data remains clear and objective. When this approach is implemented with technical precision, it removes hog populations faster and more decisively than any other ground-based method currently available to specialists. It seems simple to rely on a single solution, but in reality, no individual tool is sufficient on its own. Even with the integration of smart traps, helicopter-based hunting, and chemical deployment, Texas required one final element to ensure the feral hog problem was fully contained. The material for a comprehensive solution was nearly complete, but the final component of the strategy remained to be integrated into the larger operational framework. 100% of the technical solutions previously implemented achieved localized success, yet for several decades, these efforts suffered from a single fundamental flaw in execution. Why did these proven methods consistently fail to produce a permanent reduction in the population? The answer lies in the lack of synchronized application across property lines. Individual farmers were acting in total isolation, with one landowner setting sophisticated traps while the neighboring farm maintained herds for recreational hunting purposes. This lack of unity created a landscape where one county might launch expensive aerial hunts while the adjacent jurisdiction remained completely passive. But this is just the beginning. For the feral hog populations, these uncoordinated efforts did not represent a failure of human technology, but rather a system of geographic gaps that they could easily exploit. The animals simply migrated to whichever territory offered the lowest level of hunting or trapping pressure. One can notice how the herds shifted across borders to find safety, rendering any single-point intervention temporary. Texas officials eventually realized that the primary obstacle was not a lack of effective tools, but the fragmented manner in which those tools were deployed across the state. A specific control method that functions perfectly on a single farm becomes entirely meaningless if the neighboring land does not participate in the same protocol. It only looks obvious that individual effort counts, but in reality, all it takes is one uncoordinated link in the chain for the defensive efforts of an entire region to collapse. The process is only gaining momentum as the strategy evolves. The definitive turning point occurred when Texas shifted its operational philosophy from individual action toward comprehensive campaign thinking. Instead of isolated and sporadic efforts, control programs were organized at a massive regional scale. This involved multiple farms and dozens of counties operating simultaneously while utilizing identical strategies. Pressure was no longer applied intermittently, which meant the feral hogs no longer possessed safe escape corridors to evade the population control measures. Everything only gets more complicated when managing shared schedules. When entire regions coordinated their night hunting, strategic trapping, and chemical control on unified timelines, the hog populations dropped with remarkable speed and stayed at those lower levels. One can notice the immediate physical impact as crop losses fell sharply across the participating territories. The negative economic impacts began to reverse as the efficiency of the operations increased. Expensive technology such as thermal imaging and automated gate systems was shared across agricultural groups to maximize the return on investment. At first glance, these are just tools, but in reality, high-resolution cameras used collectively allowed engineers to redraw hog movement maps that ignored traditional property lines. Real-time communication networks were established to allow for a rapid response the moment herds shifted their direction of travel. Transition to the next level of management became necessary to hold these gains. Border areas, where hogs could still re-enter from unmanaged territories, remained the most vulnerable points in the defensive line. Even in these high-risk zones, the application of sustained regional pressure significantly slowed the rate of population recovery over time. it is visible how the remaining gaps began to close as more counties joined the coordinated model, effectively shrinking the available habitat for the invasive species. The systematic pressure ensures that the transformation of the landscape moves into a more stable phase. 100% of the results from coordinated field campaigns have forced Texas to look beyond the immediate question of how to reduce feral hog numbers, shifting the focus toward how to prevent their return. This transition in strategy brought a very different concept to the table in the form of reproductive control. Why is the state moving toward biological intervention rather than just physical removal? Research programs are currently developing methods that render feral hogs infertile by directly targeting their hormones, which affects both males and females without killing them. Instead of short-term sweep operations, sterilization causes populations to decline gradually through natural attrition over several years. No reproduction means no rebound, effectively cutting off the cycle of trapping, shooting, and explosive population recovery at its very source. The biggest challenge is not the biological concept itself, but the physical implementation on a massive scale. At first glance, the strategy seems simple, but in reality, several logistical hurdles remain. One can notice how researchers struggle with how to deliver contraceptive bait to enough hogs across vast areas of rugged terrain. Furthermore, the equipment must be designed to prevent non-target species from accessing the chemical agents. The process is only gaining momentum as specialists determine how to measure effectiveness when individual animals cannot be accurately counted. These questions are still being worked through by scientists and state officials, but Texas has already begun investing millions of dollars into the initiative. Authorities recognize that physical removal alone cannot solve a problem involving several millions of animals across the landscape. At the same time, thermal imaging technology is making night hunting operations overwhelmingly effective for field teams. It is visible how the high-resolution sensors allow hunters to locate and eliminate entire sounders in a single tactical operation under the cover of darkness. Surveillance drones glide along the horizon to map movement patterns, identify bedding areas, and pinpoint narrow choke points. This turns wildlife management into a multi-layered tactical problem rather than a simple hunt. The equipment gradually gathers data to refine the approach. Transition to the next level. Every move is calculated to ensure the long-term stabilization of the ecosystem. From here, the management strategy moves to the next phase of integration between technology and biology. 60 to 70% of the feral hog population collapsed across various Texas regions within a mere 2 years of implementing coordinated, multi-method control systems. Why did these results materialize with such unexpected speed in areas previously deemed untouchable hotspots? At first glance, the task of reclaiming thousands of acres from an invasive species seemed insurmountable. But in reality, the shift from reactive defense to sustained, systematic pressure changed the biological landscape in just a few weeks. The process is only gaining momentum. One can notice how the daily signs of rooting and soil destruction have vanished from residential zones like those near Champions Park in Irving. Here, the strategic combination of smart traps, reinforced electric fencing, and precisely coordinated hunting nearly eliminated the presence of the animals. Places that once suffered from constant intrusion became noticeably quiet as the pressure was maintained. It gets more complex further on. J. Norman's fields provide a clear observation of this technical success in an agricultural setting. The damage to the land did not vanish entirely, but it dropped to a strictly manageable level that no longer threatened the viability of the farm. Instead of the massive logistical burden of replanting hundreds of acres in a single season, the losses remained limited and localized to small, controllable patches. Thermal night hunting during the critical planting season serves as a proactive barrier to stop destruction before it can spread across the germinating crops. This shift in strategy ensures that the response occurs at the moment of entry rather than reacting after the fields are already destroyed. Everything only gets more complicated as the scale of operations expands. A new industry emerged simultaneously to support these massive feral hog control efforts, moving beyond simple eradication into a complex economic ecosystem. One can notice the growth of specialized sectors involving the manufacturing of smart traps, the calibration of thermal imaging equipment, and the deployment of professional helicopter services. It does not end at this stage. Operator training programs and systematic carcass recovery and processing facilities now turn what was once a pure economic burden into a revenue-generating structure. What was formerly viewed only as a drain on resources is evolving into a comprehensive system that creates jobs and ensures long-term control at a significant industrial scale. The equipment gradually integrates into the rural economy, providing the tools necessary for permanent management. From here, the transformation moves to the next phase of processing as the new industry stabilizes the region. 100% of the efforts directed toward the elimination of feral hogs in Texas demonstrate a singular reality regarding invasive species management. Why is it impossible to find a solitary definitive solution for such a massive environmental crisis? The answer lies in the complexity of the ecosystem itself, where a single silver bullet is entirely non-existent. Only when advanced technology, long-term strategy, and human expertise are integrated into a singular coordinated network does the operational balance truly begin to shift in favor of the landscape. The process is only gaining momentum. Smart traps equipped with cellular triggers and thermal sensors represent a critical technological leap. These systems allow for the capture of entire sounders simultaneously, ensuring that no individuals remain to reproduce and continue the cycle of destruction. At first glance, the capture seems like a simple mechanical action, but in reality, it requires millisecond precision and remote monitoring to be effective. One can notice how the steel gates of the traps drop with a sudden heavy metallic sound once the target group is centered. Aerial hunting from helicopters provides a different tactical advantage by covering thousands of acres of dense brush in a single flight. This method allows teams to reach inaccessible terrain where ground vehicles cannot maneuver. But this is just the beginning of the integrated approach. Chemical control and reproductive management are being introduced to stabilize the population growth from within the biological cycle of the animals. It is visible how the equipment gradually adapts to the terrain, utilizing high-resolution cameras to track movement patterns across vast ranch lands. Texas is not merely reducing the immediate financial damage caused by these animals. It is fundamentally redefining the methodology for managing large-scale ecological risks on a global scale. Everything only gets more complicated as the systems are refined to protect agricultural resources and native biodiversity. The integration of these diverse tools ensures that the strategy remains as dynamic as the problem it seeks to solve. The technological systems continue to evolve as the data from each operation is analyzed and applied to the next phase. Thus, the management of the landscape reaches a standard of efficiency that was previously impossible to achieve. The transformation of the environment moves toward a more stable state through the application of these coordinated industrial and biological controls.